If you're a Spider-Man fan like I am, well, this video is for you. Welcome to the high-end breakdown, where I break down movies that you like. And today we're going to be looking at Spider-Man. The movie is based from 1962's Amazing Fantasy 15, where in that issue in the comics, it is of course the origin story of the character and his very first appearance. Or it's based from other media like the cartoons, other comic book retellings, and should I also add, the 70s version.
That's right, Peter. I'm you, and you're me, and this is a gun.
After this movie came out in 2002, it earned positive reviews from critics and was widely successful at the box office, and it gained 2 sequels and 2 reboots. And yes, I will be covering all 7 movies, but I won't be covering Into the Spider-Verse since I will only be covering the live-action movies. Spider-Man is directed by Sam Raimi, whom you may know is the same dude who directed The Evil Dead and its sequels, but not the 2013 movie, since I guess that movie is a reboot or something. He also directed movies like the recently released Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Darkman, Drag Me to Hell, A Simple Plan, and that 2013 Oz movie. And one of the reasons why Sony chose Sam Raimi as director in the first place was because Raimi was an avid comic book collector with a director's collection of over 25,000 comics. And with that out of the way, let's get on with the breakdown. We get introduced to Peter Parker, a nerdy and shy but intelligent high school senior student at Midtown Science and Technology in Queens, New York City. He is played by Tobey Maguire, which is my definitive version of the character in my opinion. Maguire was 26 years old when he donned the suit, which is a bit strange since Peter Parker was supposed to be 17 years old. But we can ignore that since Tobey did look the part and is widely considered as everyone's favorite Spider-Man. Mary Jane Watson, played by Kirsten Dunst, is a girl that Peter has a crush on and is nice to Peter, but her boyfriend, a sports player and a school bully, Flash Thompson, played by Joe Manganiello, and his idiot friends bully Peter. Peter's only friend is Harry Osborn, played by James Franco, who, though rich and good-looking, is an outcast like Peter. Harry, however, is somewhat jealous of the affection his father, Norman Osborn, shows to Peter. Norman Osborn is played by the phenomenal Willem Dafoe, and he would later on reprise his role in Spider-Man No Way Home. Norman, the founder of the fictional company Oscorp, appreciates Peter's scientific aptitude.
Harry tells me you're quite the science whiz. You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Peter's science class goes on a field trip to a genetic science laboratory at Columbia University. The lab works on spiders and has managed to create a new species of super spiders. While Peter is taking photos of Mary Jane like a Chad that he truly is, one of the genetically altered spiders escapes, and without anyone noticing, it lands on Peter's hand and it bites him. Meanwhile, at Oscorp, General Slocum visits Oscorp to see the results of their new super soldier formula. When one of Norman's top scientists, Professor Mendel Stromm, warns him that the formula is unstable, and General Slocum threatens Norman to pull all of the funding from Oscorp. Peter lives with his Uncle Ben and Aunt May, a lovely couple who raised Peter. Uncle Ben is played by the late Cliff Robertson, may he rest in peace, and Aunt May is played by Rosemary Harris. After the field trip, Peter goes home feeling ill and immediately goes to bed. At a genetic level, the venom of the spider that was injected to Peter begins to merge with Peter's DNA. Later that night at Oscorp, Norman exposes himself to the Goblin formula to prove that the serum is ready. Norman gains superhuman strength and agility, but he was driven insane. He kills Strom and then he steals the Goblin suit and the Goblin glider. Peter wakes up the next morning feeling better than ever. He also learns that his scrawny physique is now filled with ripped muscles and his eyesight is perfect. At school that day, Peter learns he can shoot webs out of his wrist, which in the comics, Spider-Man has no organic webs, and he mainly uses a device called a web shooter, which in later reboots they did manage to use the web shooters. They were planning to add the web shooters in, but Raimi decided to remove them because he felt that it was too credible for a teenager, and I quote, to be able to produce an adhesive in his spare time that a big company could not make. And if I'm gonna be honest, I kind of understand onto why Raimi removed the web shooters. He demonstrates his new abilities by catching Mary Jane and her food tray when she slips at lunch. This scene was done with no CGI, by the way, and was accomplished after it took them 156 takes, which is very impressive. After he throws a lunch tray at Flash, Peter beats the enraged Flash in a fist fight.
I don't want to fight you, Flash.
I wouldn't want to fight me neither.
He felt embarrassed and he skips class to test his new abilities, but he was knocked unconscious. Later that night, he and Mary Jane casually flirt with each other, and although Flash breaks this up when he arrives with his new car, Peter believes he needs a car to impress Mary Jane, but knows neither he nor the cash-strapped and retired Ben and May would be able to afford one. One night, he spies an ad in a newspaper. A local professional wrestling league will pay him $3,000 to anyone who can survive 3 minutes in the ring with the wrestling champion, Bonesaw. Peter designs his first suit and heads out to the arena by telling Ben and May he is going to the library. Ben and May are worried about the changes in Peter's personality, and Ben insists on driving him to the library. Ben tries to explain his and May's concerns, and he encourages Peter not to get into any more fights. He might have the power to beat Flash Thompson and people like Flash Thompson, but when Ben told Peter the words,
"Remember, with great power comes great responsibility."
This line is so synonymous with the character that the line itself is a burden that Peter has to carry over the guilt that will happen later on. Peter reacts badly, like any rebellious teenager would, and he tells Ben he is not his father and should not act like he is. Peter not only survives the wrestling match, but he also defeats Bonesaw by killing him in 2 minutes. But the promoter only pays Peter $100. Angry at being scammed, Peter stands aside as an armed robber steals all the cash and holds up the promoter, and the robber escapes through an elevator.
You could have taken that guy apart. Now he's gonna get away with my money.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
After that confrontation, Peter leaves the arena and head down to where Uncle Ben was supposed to pick him up. But Peter is shocked to learn that Uncle Ben was wounded with a gun and his car was stolen. And I wasn't crying. I wasn't crying during this scene. I wasn't crying. I wasn't crying. In anguish, Peter hunts down the man who killed his uncle. After chasing down the robber, Peter stalks the robber and then beats him until he gives up. However, Peter is horrified to learn that the man who killed his uncle is the man he let loose. The robber was about to shoot Peter in the head, but he manages to disarm the robber, and the robber falls out of a window where his body is recovered by the police. Peter is heartbroken that night, knowing that if he had stopped the robber when he had the chance and not acted so selfishly, then Uncle Ben would still be alive. That same night, a menacing figure wearing the stolen Goblin suit and riding the Goblin glider attacks a weapons test at Quest Aerospace, Oscorp's chief competitor. Their prototype that they mentioned earlier is destroyed and that General Guy is killed. Peter is inspired by Ben's words to use his newly found powers for the greater good. He designs his new red and blue skin-tight suit, complete with a webbing pattern and spider symbols, and he swings around New York, foiling robberies and muggings as Spider-Man, a name he borrows from the announcer at the wrestling match. This does not get him the praise of one J. Jonah Jameson, played by J.K. Simmons, in a phenomenal, iconic, and hilarious performance to the point where they even brought him back for Spider-Man Far From Home and No Way Home. Jameson is this grumpy and stubborn editor who is the owner and publisher of the fictional Daily Bugle. However, when JJ learns that Spider-Man sells newspapers, he puts out a call to photographers for better photos of his front page.
Cash money for a picture of Spider-Man. He doesn't want to be famous, and I'll make him infamous.
Peter, Harry, and Mary Jane graduate from high school and move to the city. Peter and Harry get a loft together and attend classes at Empire State. Mary Jane works as a waitress, and she and Harry also began dating. Harry apologizes to Peter but points out Peter was always too shy to make a move on her. Peter struggles to hold down a job, and Norman offers to help Peter find a job. But Norman respects Peter's desire to make his own way in the world. Peter sees JJ's ad for good photos of Spider-Man, and after webbing his camera in convenient places that does not raise any suspicion, he gets excellent photos of his own heroic actions. And although Jameson doesn't pay well, he agrees to buy more of Peter's photos. Norman is also happy after murdering his rivals at Quest Aerospace, and a lot of things happen about the company accepting a deal at Quest or some shit, and Norman is very devastated to learn that the board of directors has accepted the deal. His insanity manifests itself in this scene when Norman went on a tantrum.
But you can't do this to me. I started this company.
You know how much I sacrificed?
Perfection. As the Goblin, he attacks Oscorp's annual Unity Day street fair parade and he kills the board of directors. This attack also endangers Mary Jane. Spider-Man fights off the Goblin and rescues Mary Jane when she nearly falls to her death, which we'll see a lot in future movies. After the attack, the Goblin decides he and Spider-Man should be partners as he talks to Norman in the mirror. And you can really tell the difference between Norman and the Goblin due to the fact that Willem Dafoe used a fake teeth for Norman, while the Goblin persona uses Willem Dafoe's real teeth. It's really creepy, and I fucking praise Willem Dafoe's performance. The Goblin attacks the Bugle to lure Spider-Man into a trap, and he knocks him out pretty easily. And then he gives Spider-Man a few days to think over his offer of partnership. He warns Spider-Man that the city will eventually turn against him, which did happen in No Way Home, let's be fair. Mary Jane finds herself falling in love with Spider-Man, a feeling only reinforced when he saves her from a bunch of rapists a few days later during a rainy night. This time, she thanks him with the greatest and hottest kissing scene ever put to film. And while they were filming this scene, Toby's sinuses kept filling up with water as it was performed in a driving rain. And truly, this scene is so damn sex. Anyways, moving on. And she doesn't know he is really Peter. A few days later, on Thanksgiving, Goblin stages a fire in an apartment building to again lure Spider-Man and get an answer. Spider-Man refuses to join the Goblin, the two fight, and Spider-Man receives a cut on his arm thanks to the Goblin's razor bats. As Norman and Peter, both of them are attending a Thanksgiving dinner at Peter and Harry's loft. When Peter arrives to dinner with a fresh cut on his sleeve, Norman realizes that Peter is Spider-Man and he leaves. On the way out, he insults Mary Jane in front of Harry.
Harry, please, look at her.
You think a woman like that sniffing around because she likes your personality?
Your mother was beautiful, too. They're all beautiful. Until they're snarling after your trust fund like a pack of ravening wolves.
You're wrong about her, Dad.
A word to the not-so-wise about your little girlfriend. Do what you need to with her, then broom her fast.
And MJ is of course hurt that Harry didn't defend her and she leaves. That night, Goblin attacks Aunt May at home, sending her to the hospital. While visiting her, Mary Jane reveals her crush on Spider-Man to Peter, but they wind up having an intimate moment themselves. And while Peter and MJ were having a moment, Harry sees this and knows his relationship with Mary Jane is over. The Goblin decides to strike at Spider-Man through Mary Jane after getting that information by Harry, who was oblivious that his dad is the Goblin. He kidnaps her by a jump scare that did not let me have any good sleep when I was a kid. He then sabotages a trolley car full of children along the Mid-Hudson Roosevelt Bridge. When Spider-Man arrives, the Goblin gives him the choice of saving Mary Jane or the trolley car full of kids. Man, what a psychopath. The Goblin then drops them both from the bridge. Spider-Man manages to save both with an assist from a bunch of pedestrians on the bridge who throws Goblin with debris and delay him from his attempts to kill Spider-Man. After Spider-Man puts MJ and the trolley car full of kids on a safe platform, Goblin grabs Spider-Man and throws him into an abandoned building. The two fight and the Goblin overpowers Spider-Man, by beating the ever-living shit out of him. The Goblin even throws a pumpkin bomb directly at Spider-Man's face, heavily damaging Spider-Man's mask and wounding him. It's such a brutal moment that the special effects team even had to tone down the gore just so it could get a PG-13 rating. Which, if I'm gonna be honest, there isn't much blood. Okay, never mind. As the Goblin holds back Spider-Man and is about to kill him with his blades, he makes the mistake of threatening Mary Jane. Enraged at this, Spider-Man beats Goblin senseless, overpowering him, but stops when the Goblin unmasks to reveal himself to Peter that he's Norman. Peter is so shocked that Norman is the Goblin. Norman then tries to reason to Peter that all of the actions that had occurred were from the influence of the Goblin's persona. As Norman talks to Peter, the Goblin's glider appears behind Spider-Man, and the Goblin persona immediately takes over Norman. Goblin tries to use his glider to kill Spider-Man, but he leaps out of the way and Norman gets stabbed in the dick. As he dies, Norman asks Peter not to tell Harry about the Green Goblin. Spider-Man takes Norman's body back to his penthouse, and Harry sees them and blames Spider-Man for Norman's death. At the funeral, he vows revenge towards Spider-Man and thanks Peter for being such a great friend. Peter goes to visit Uncle Ben's grave, and MJ finds him there and confesses her love for him, and then she kisses him passionately. Peter wants to tell her the truth, but he can't. He tells her that they could never be together and tells her that he will just be her friend. And MJ has a feeling that she might have kissed him before, but Peter walks away. He narrates to the audience and reminds us of Uncle Ben's words and the burden that he has to carry. The movie ends with an iconic final swing joined with Danny Elfman's iconic theme. So in this section of the video, I will be giving my overall opinion of the film and give it a proper rating. So yeah, let's go to my rating. So Spider-Man is by far the perfect superhero origin story ever made, and it's not because of the nostalgia talking. I still think that the movie's humor is a bit cheesy and the choreography isn't like the future movies, but I still had a fun time rewatching this film. The CGI might not hold up to this day, but what lacks of the CGI are its visuals. The film is expertly shot and directed, the score by Danny Elfman is brilliant, and Sam Raimi truly understands the character of Peter Parker. And I truly respect the hell out of this film. The high-end moment is an award that I will give to the best or iconic moment in the film, and it goes to the upside down kiss. It is the steamiest and one of the most memorable moments in the film. High-end character is an award that I give to a memorable, iconic, and enjoyable character in the film, and it goes to, well, I was going to give it to Norman Osborn, but I wanted to go stupid for this one and give it to J. Jonah Jameson. He's by far the most hilarious and iconic character throughout, and we even get signs that he isn't much of a selfish prick. Overall, this movie is amazing, pun intended, and it gets a 9 out of 10. And that's it for this breakdown. I hope you enjoyed, and I do want to know your own thoughts of the film. Well, write it down at the comments below, and I will see you all in the next breakdown.